Good morning, everyone, and welcome back to the second part of the tutorial. I'll continue with what. Can you hear me? Okay. So I'll continue with what Jaidev started. Uh, the part I'll cover. First of all, thanks. Let me thank the organizers for inviting for this tutorial. It gives us an opportunity to again uh, clean up something that we have been quickly putting down over the last 2 3 years, and these tutorials give us an opportunity to put them in a way that we can communicate to others better. Uh, so I'll cover the same thing as what Jaidev was doing. So it's indeed some kind of reinforcement learning, although I'm not sure. That got me thinking about reinforcement learning. Uh, and the key difference is that Jaidev looked at this particular kind of lower bound construction, which works for the discrete case. This Paninsky, the so-called Paninsky construction that he showed. And now we want to generalize it to the more general case, and therefore we need to be able to handle a more general abstract construction. And that's what I will try to bring out. Along the way, I will try to address some of the questions raised about the role of interactivity, about heuristic, why that scheme, the simulator infer scheme, may be optimal, although it seems to be wasteful in entropy. So one thing that may have come out in Jaidev's part is that it's not really the entropy like the compression problem. This sounds like a compression problem. And so it sounds like a compression problem. And so you start thinking about entropy, but actually it's a statistical problem, and we don't need to recover the symbols. We need to preserve the statistical distances. And that's why that's the heuristic you should keep in mind rather than thinking of compression and entropy right away. And that's what we will try to do. Of course, not only that compression channel family, here we are looking at a more general channel families. We are looking at more general channel families, including those that arise in local differential privacy. Okay. And one more quick remark on the format of this tutorial. I thought I'll do something live. I'll do one calculation live. And I always in my head think this calculation can be done in 15 minutes, but then I wrote down and it turned out to be 23 pages or so. Based on our experience in teaching online last semester, there's no way to do this live. So I was writing and I thought I'll erase some part and do it live, but now there won't be any live action in this tutorial, except that I have my writing pad. So if you want me to elaborate on something, I can expand directly there. So please keep the questions coming. I can see them, and of course, Clemo and Jaidev can also answer at the same time. I think even Zitang and Aditya are here. They can also help in answering. All right, so let's get started. So we'll see more general bounds, and we will see bounds that allow interaction, uh, which doesn't mean that we will show interaction doesn't help. The point is that we'll be able to handle interaction. That itself is not so trivial. And just to quickly revise the model and put it on a more general footing, and some of you who have taken some statistics course may have seen this model for a parametric family and parameter estimation. So we look at this family of distributions p theta, which consists of this members p theta. Theta is the parameter we want to learn, and this is a family of distributions on this discrete alphabet x, on this not discrete, on this arbitrary alphabet x. We see n samples from these distributions from an unknown p theta. Okay, and the goal is to find out this unknown p theta by looking at samples from it. Except that we don't see these samples. We only see these samples under some information constraints. So you get the sample xt, that xt is passed through wt, and you see the sample xt that's passed through wt. Otherwise, I'll end up highlighting too much. I think should use a pointer. Yeah. So xt passed through this wt of your choice at every time, and then you get this yt, which can be used by your statistical inference algorithm. And this is done at every time. This notion of adaptivity or interactivity that we have been talking about. Let's just, if you want, you can ignore this word sequentially. These are in there are there's a class system in the interactive literature. People of different classes like different levels of interactivity. We belong to the whatever is the lowest of those class. So we are happy with the sequentially interactive setting. There is a blackboard, whiteboard setting, and so on and so forth. So how do we choose this channel? By looking at the previous messages, you choose the next channel. That's the notion of interactivity we have. And once you have all these y1 to once you have all these y1 to yt collected, what you can do with them is that you can form your estimate theta hat from y1 to yn. In statistics, in classical statistics, you form this estimate from x1 to xn, the raw samples, except in our setting now, you don't use just the x1 to xn, you use this y1 to yn, the output of the channels that you choose. And then you estimate the unknown theta. What is your criterion for the quality of your estimate? How good is your estimate? It is this loss function. So you have an algorithm which produces this theta hat. This algorithm has two parts. It has this estimator theta hat, and it has a protocol pi for selecting channels interactively. Together, they constitute your algorithm. So your algorithm spits out this estimate theta hat. So there is a small abuse of notation here. Theta hat is the name of the estimate as well as the function which computes that estimate. It's fine. So this estimate theta hat computed by estimator function theta hat of y1 to yn. What's the quality of this guy? It's computed by this loss function. It's the worst case loss, worst case over all possible theta, because you don't know theta and you want to know theta. Expected value under p of that theta, theta minus theta hat. So I'm assuming theta is in some finite dimensional space, and I put LP loss function for any p. In this talk, we'll just look at L2 loss, squared L2 loss. Okay, but one of the things that the techniques that we will see in this tutorial enable is to allow you to work with any LP loss. But since we are using Aswat's method, it's not, we can't go to arbitrary losses. We must restrict to something like an additive loss, additive across coordinates. Well, long story short, that you can keep in mind LP losses, but don't get carried away and think of some arbitrary metrics and all. Okay, so this is, I think, a quick review of the setting. Any questions here? Although Jaidev covered this in great detail, please feel free to ask. Okay, if not, so what's our goal? We want to derive lower bounds. So we want to find out how small can we make this worst case error. If we're allowed to choose any algorithm, we're allowed to design any algorithm of our choice. So this is an information theoretic lower bound. Rahul had early on asked the question, are there any computational constraints? So no computational constraint. It can be any algorithm, and still the bounds must hold. And how are such min-max lower bounds on such lower bounds on worst case loss function derived? They're derived using these heuristics from information theory, which I have tried to articulate. So this is the kind of thing that I was alluding to in response to Sam's question about entropy, that it's the pairwise distances one should think about. So I mean, there is no gospel. This is just our attempt to articulate what these lower bound proofs look like. Unfortunately, this is a recipe and not a formula. So it's not like we are giving you a great formula which solves all your problem. These lower bounds are a recipe for deriving lower bounds. And so we have to go through it sometimes again and again for different problems with minimal changes. But the techniques that we will show in this tutorial, they are sort of, we believe, quite general to apply to a large class of problems in this setting. The final theorem has some plug-and-play nature to it, and that's what we are trying to get to. Okay, so 4 heuristics, we will come to them one by one in this talk. First is capture uncertainty about the unknown theta. So you see y1 to yn. So you didn't know anything about theta to begin with, but now you see y1 to yn. So you know something about theta, but still you don't know everything about theta. Still some uncertainty remains. And that is the reason why you'll have a lower bound. So capture that uncertainty about theta. We'll have to put in some maths to make it concrete. Okay. Now, uncertainty, one of the big questions Shannon answered is how to put a number to uncertainty. and he brought in these measures of information to do that. So bring in that measure of information. Once you have articulated uncertainty, then relate it to a measure of information. Say that uncertainty is as large as some measure of information. That's the second step we'll do. Okay, so great. Now we have a number for this uncertainty, a formula for this uncertainty. But one of the key things we want to do is to understand how this uncertainty behaves as a function of number of observations n. And heuristically, you can imagine it reduces. As you see more samples, the uncertainty reduces. But it turns out that the reason we go to the Shannon's measures of information is because they give a very nice behavior for uncertainty as a function of n. Simple additive linear behavior. I've written information is usually additive in n. That's a very loose statement. Maybe sub-additive would be the right word. But in a more general language, this is called information tensorizes, which just means that you have a nice formula, it grows nicely with it. And we will see that. That's the third step we'll see. And after we are done with all this, we'll get a lower bound and we'll get a bound for this worst case loss. But it will have WTs present in them. And the final step would be to figure out how WTs have affected all this information. So we expect from data processing inequality that WT will reduce the amount of information. Nothing like raw data. Raw data would have been great. But now you don't have raw data, and these WTs would have forced you to reduce the information. And we will, in a final step, articulate exactly how much that reduction is. And that is what the effect of these channel families are, or the information constraints are. This is the sort of the recipe we'll go over. We'll follow on this tutorial. Okay, any questions? Okay, let's start with the first step. So first step is, as we discussed, the first step is to quantify uncertainty. And information theory always quantifies uncertainty for discrete number of unknowns. And even though the parameter space is continuous, we still have to put some discrete points there. And the point is that one should not confuse uncertainty with accuracy. So the distance between these points is the accuracy one is seeking. Okay. And once you are okay with that accuracy, then you figure out some points and you try to capture how much uncertainty is there. So we choose a finite set of m points, m parameter values. These parameters can be vectors. If for concreteness, you can imagine that these parameters are in k-dimensional. It's a k-dimensional vectors. And so you found capital M such points in the parameter space. This is a difficult example one needs to construct. Jadev gave one instance of this example for the discrete distribution setting. But these examples are well known in statistics, and they are there are not too many examples, maybe 5 examples for all lower bounds in the world. And it's also heuristically clear what this example should look like. Okay, but so you have this example, this difficult case of this m points, and we assume that one of them is chosen randomly, and you get n samples from it. So since your estimator can figure out which parameter theta is here, it should also be able to figure out which of these randomly chosen example is currently being used in the simplified version of the problem. And now there are multiple ways of capturing the uncertainty about m, about this theta that remains after you observe yn. And this various ways have different names. So if you choose just 2 points, if you just have 2 points or 2 sort of cluster of points, but let's say 2 points, and you want to capture uncertainty there, you still don't know which one it is. That's an instantiation of what is called Lecomte's method. Okay, and there the uncertainty is 1 minus the total variation distance. How difficult is it to distinguish 2 points, 2 real numbers? Well, it's the distance between those 2 points. If the points are really close, if they are nanometer close, you have to define a very fine measuring instrument for that. Okay, it's very difficult to separate 2 points which are 1 nanometer distance away. Similarly, for statistics, if 2 points are very close in statistical distance, 2 distributions are very close in statistical distance, it's very difficult to distinguish them. And so this uncertainty is 1 minus the statistical distance. The farther they are, easier it is, and so uncertainty reduces. This is for 2 points. Can we find a corresponding measure of uncertainty for multiple points, larger m? Yeah, that's Fano's method. And that uncertainty is given by this conditional entropy, Shannon's conditional entropy, conditional uncertainty. This Z is my Z is my notation for the index of the unknown parameter. So uncertainty in Z given your observations. This is for multiple point. This is Fano's method. Turns out that what we have to use in what we use in our what the lower bound that we present is a third way of doing these things, which is somewhat intermediate between Fano and Lecam method. This is a vague statement. And this is the Assuas method that they presented. So instead of thinking about the uncertainty in the whole vector theta, we strictly keep in mind that theta is not some abstract quantity, theta is a vector. And in fact, the index that we use to represent theta is also a vector. The Z is also a vector. That's what we imagine in this case. And instead of thinking about uncertainty in Z, we talk about uncertainty in average uncertainty in each coordinate of Z. So we break that uncertainty into coordinates of Z. That's what Assuas method does. It is suited for high dimensional statistics and it's suited for interactive protocols. I don't think this clarity on why is there currently, but it is something like how when you look at gradient, you break it coordinate wise, right? And you express arbitrary directions by breaking things coordinate wise. So Assuas method has that feel to it. And it breaks this uncertainty into coordinate wise uncertainty and capture different directions through this coordinate wise uncertainty. All right. So in Assuas method, you start in all of these methods, you start with these examples. And what you want out of this example is some kind of embedding between this uncertainty of each coordinate of Z to not knowing that coordinate Z. So sorry, the loss function theta Z to not knowing that coordinate of Z. This is some assumption that your example must satisfy. It's a rough statement. The kind of example you would like to construct must satisfy the following property. If you look at the parameter theta corresponding to a Z, and look at the same parameter, look at the parameter theta corresponding to a Z prime, and you look at their ith coordinate of those two parameters, they should differ by the loss there. This is for L2, let's say, should differ by some gamma, some fixed parameter gamma, times the indicator function that the ith coordinate of Zi and Zi prime, ith coordinate of Z and Z prime are different. Okay. This is like embedding this loss in theta to uncertainty in to lack of to your uncertainty about ith coordinate of Z. So this is something which your construction must satisfy. If you look at the L2, if you look at the L2 loss, then this L2 distance between theta Z and theta Z prime should be approximately this gamma square, the parameter of your construction, times this sum of this disagreement between each coordinate of Z. That's what your construction must satisfy. So once you have such a construction, which you can have, then let's look at our algorithm. Our algorithm will have samples from theta Z, and from those samples, you would find an estimate theta hat. Okay, we would like to convert this estimate for theta hat, to an estimate for Z, this unknown Z that we have. And that we can do in this way. You find your estimate theta hat, and then look for all these parameters theta Z from your construction, and look for the one which is closest to theta hat. That's my estimate for Z hat. And one can show that the squared loss under for theta hat when your distribution is theta Z, the one corresponding to theta Z, is bounded below by this quantity. This is exactly the proof. Okay, so we shifted from theta hat to theta of Z hat. That's because this is the closest one. And then once you have that, then because the way we have constructed things, this is just expected value of indicator function, which becomes probability. So you have this part. So in other words, the loss function for this illustrated example can be bounded in terms of coordinate wise probability of errors in estimating ZIs. and some of you who may have seen Fano's inequality or some other information theory know that we can handle this coordinate wise, or we can handle these probabilities of error. We can derive lower bound for this probability of error. So all we have done through this construction is related our loss function in whatever metric that was. It was in this example, in what I have shown here, it is a squared loss function. I've related it to probability of error, gamma squared times probability. But this gamma is a parameter of your construction. It is how your embedding works. Each coordinate difference is related to this gamma times indicator function. All right. So yeah, so just to refresh our memories, this is an important chain of things here that I've written. So first, this z is generated uniformly from those 1 to m. Then once you have the z, that determines theta z. Once you have theta z, you get these samples x1 to xn, and from x1 to xn, our protocol yields y1 to yn. That we choose some channels, and channel outputs are y1 to yn. So you get y1 to yn. And then there's an estimate that your algorithm had, which looks at y1 to yn and gave you theta hat. And then we have constructed this z hat from that theta hat. So this is the sort of the Markov chain that holds, Markov relation that holds because of your algorithm, the way it processes things. All right. So once we have this, z is uniform. So we'll take an expectation over z outside here. Okay. And when you take expectation over z, this guy becomes simply probability that the ith coordinate of z is not equal to the ith coordinate of your estimate. Okay, so we are in business now. We will derive lower bound for this. This is the probability of error for a binary hypothesis problem. This is the power of Ashworth method, and you know what we have used here is the fact that our loss function was additive across coordinates. That is crucial in Ashworth method. So Ashworth method is somewhat restricted because of the kind of loss functions it can handle. But yeah, if you get stuck with this non-additive loss functions which are not LP, then yeah, so you're doing too much.
As an example, Ashworth's method will not give the tight bound even without any constraints. If you look at the L infinity norm, because it's the limit of LP, etc., but it's not nicely additive. So even without any information constraints, if you use Ashworth's method to like mean estimation in L infinity norm, that's going to be loose by a low dimension factor. But Fano will be tight.
Yeah. Right. So yeah, one may ask, why are we not using Fano then? Because Fano has other problems with it, in particular in terms of handling interactivity. It's difficult to use Fano's method there. Nobody knows why. Maybe some people know, but we don't know why clearly. Okay, so this is very simple now. So this is a notationally heavy presentation. So I'll keep on simplifying the notation and then going back to the original notation. So I'll make sure that you're completely lost. So the only way to rescue yourself from it is by asking questions, because I mean, it may seem as if I understand what's going on, but I don't really understand. So if you ask questions, then I'll be forced to think and I'll be forced to explain to you. Okay. So okay, so to begin with these notations, which you would have seen earlier in this part, but by now would have forgotten because it was more than half an hour ago. So, so this distribution is the distribution of the output given that the ith coordinate of your unknown z is +1. Z, remember, is just +1 or -1. Each coordinate is just +1 or -1. That's the parameterization. This p of -i, the subscript yn, is the distribution on the output given that the ith coordinate is -1. And as we know, for binary hypothesis testing, we just want to figure out if z is +1 or -1. So either you see samples from this distribution or this distribution. And what's the best you can do for probability of error of those things? The best you can do is half into 1 minus total variation distance. Okay, for uniform prior. This is a uniform prior. We have assumed uniform prior on each coordinate. We can go beyond uniform also, but for now, this is for uniform. Okay, so this is this. So now we have brought in total variation distance. We got pairwise distances. So this loss here is gamma squared into I, this summation 1 minus pairwise distances. Okay. I can do this. I can take the summation inside and do some small simplification so that I get one metric here. I like to think of distances which determine the difficulty of a problem. So I'm trying to put down that distance here. So this loss is more than some kind of uncertainty, and that uncertainty is this is a parameterization of a construction, gamma square k, but it now looks like that Lacam method thing. It is 1 minus the average distance per coordinate. Lacam had 1 minus distance for 2. Now it becomes average distance, average coordinate wise distance. Okay, right. So this is us to us lower bound. This is our first step, and this is the measure of uncertainty we were looking for, 1 minus this. So first step is done. Now we have a measure of uncertainty, but now we have to be able to handle this quantity. So we switch from this distances to some notion of information. One may argue that average distance is a notion of information, but right. Let's say from distances to Shannon's notion of information, which have this very nice subadditivity and properties like that. Okay, so we had this average distance, and we'll take a square because we must. And so then we use Cauchy-Schwarz, and then you get the square. Okay, fine. Why are we taking these squares here? This is something you may or may not know, that total variation distance is L1 distance, and it's the square of total variation distance, which has nice additive structure. Okay. L2 squared distance has nice additive structure. Similarly, square of total variation distance, that total variation is L1, has a nice additive structure we want to exploit. So we go for the square distance. Okay, so what do we do with this quantity? Is it any, where are we headed with this? So here is how we'll bring in a notion of information, this mutual information, through this lemma. It's a very small lemma, but I have only written it down first time when I was preparing for this talk. So I'm not sure if this is somewhere. Must be there at a lot of places. Okay, so suppose you have two distributions, P plus and P minus, and suppose this U is uniform, so it decides which one you're deciding on. Then the square of total variation distance between them is less than equal to 2 times mutual information between this U and X. This mutual information is Shannon's mutual information. Entropy of X minus entropy of X given U. Entropy of U, the uncertainty in U before you saw X, minus the uncertainty in U that remains after you saw X.
Maybe you can write the expression, because I think I was supposed to write it. I didn't. I deleted off.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, that's mutual information. You can do it with X also, but U is the unknown, so this makes more sense for us. The fact that this is symmetric in U and X is irrelevant for us. But that's another amazing thing here. So we don't know anything about U, uncertainty in U, H of U, minus the uncertainty that remains in U after you see X, that's mutual information. So this distance square is less than 2 times mutual information. How do you show that? Distance square is less than 2 times, this is just triangular inequality. We can choose any Q we can bring in any Q here, a favorite Q we can bring in. And then this 2 times total variation distance square is less than equal to this quantity called Kullback-Leibler divergence. Don't ask me to write that part, maybe. No, I'll write it if there is, if people want me to write it.
It's relative entropy.
Relative entropy. That simplifies it. Yeah. So this is what is called Pinsker's inequality, and instead of using log to the base 2, which is traditional in this literature, I'm using natural log so that I don't have to have an extra ln2 here. So now this is this divergence, and it turns out that if you choose Q to be the average of these two distributions, then this is just 2 times the mutual information. Okay, so this total variation distance square for 2 distributions is just less than 2 times the mutual information between uniform choice of these distributions and the observation. Okay. Okay, so we see how we can bring in mutual information now, a notion of information now. We have this total variation distance square, it's less than equal to 2 times mutual information between the ith coordinate and yn. And then we can do some gymnastics of mutual information. This is actually that convexity that Jadev had in his talk. I'm writing it in mutual information language for those of you who have seen chain rules of mutual information. Chain rules and inequalities of mutual information are also in some senses convexity arguments. So you can always add some extra thing here, and that will only increase the mutual information. The extra thing I'm adding is all the other coordinates of Z. Remember, I can add anything and the mutual information can only increase. And then it turns out that by chain rule, this would be split into the conditional mutual information, the remaining information about Zi in Yn when you condition on Z minus I, and the mutual information between Z minus I and Zi. But this Zi is independent of Z minus I. Okay, this is a good question. Why working with mutual information instead of KL divergence? Yeah, that's just no particular reason. Paper is the paper we are basing this on remains in that KL divergence language. But then, there's no reason for it. They're the same for me. Mutual information is the average distance. It's the information radius in KL divergence. So I can keep on writing that average distance all the time in KL divergence. But I just want to show that this convexity and all sometimes is buried in chain rule and non-negativity of mutual information. That's what convexity is in this setting. Right. So we get this. I think another question is, why do we condition on the Z minus I? That's an important question, because this is the reason we condition, the reason we bring in this extra quantity here is so that we can do that. So the distributions were getting complicated if we don't condition on. So we condition on this, and now we will have some independence which will come out in our observations. Okay, so this quantity here, average distance and total variation distance, is bounded above by average mutual information that the ith coordinate that Yn has about the ith coordinate of Zi, even when you tell it all the other coordinates of Z. So if you tell me all the coordinates of Z, then what's the mutual information between Yn and ith coordinates? That's the bound we have brought in. So we have now completed the first two steps of our heuristic. And the lower bound for loss that we have is now, this is a good point. The Z minus I is everything but I. Okay, so this is our lower bound now. So we first brought in the measure of uncertainty, and now we switch to notion of information. So the lower bound is gamma square K into 1 minus square root of this average information about the ith coordinate that Yn has. So this is our notion of information, and now we will control this information to derive a further lower bound here. We'll derive an upper bound for this average information to derive a further lower bound here. But before we do that, let's quickly use the most important property of this mutual information. That's why we switched to this measure of information. Otherwise, we would have happily worked with this total variation distance. It tensorizes. Tensorizes is it's a vague word, although it sounds like a very formal and strict word, by the way, but it is not. It's a vague word used in a broader context. Here I'm just referring to this identity, which you all probably know is the chain rule for mutual information. So if you want to find out how much information Yn reveals about Zi, you can break it into information revealed by the tth coordinate about Zi, the tth observation Yt about Zi, given that you have seen all the other coordinates before. So it breaks this large distance, large information into smaller contributions for each sample. This is the reason we brought in mutual information, or Kullback-Leibler divergence has similar chain rule property. If you use the same, total variation distance also has a similar property. That's called triangular inequality. But if you use it, you will end up using it too early. It's like using triangular inequality instead of squaring and using additivity for L2 distance. Okay, there are many magical things which happen because of that, and this is that magic that we are bringing. By the way, these are very profound ideas, and they are not a part of just this talk. This is what people have developed over the years in deriving lower bound for statistics, and people like Lacam and others have made major contribution in realizing this, that where should you exactly use additivity? What's the right way of doing it? Okay. Right. So we have now tensorized this information. Now we want to think about how WTs reduce information. We'll slowly build toward this last part. And what we will do is we'll bound each of this term, how much information does the tth sample reveal about the ith coordinate of zi? Provided I already told you all the other coordinates of z, and you have already seen all the previous samples. Okay. Okay, so let's simplify the notation. Now Wt will denote the tth channel chosen as a function of all the yt. I have condition on a fixed realization of yt and a fixed realization of all the other coordinates. Okay, mutual information is taking expectation of this quantity over all these guys. Conditional mutual information takes expectation of all these quantities over all these realizations. So to simplify our notation, I'll just call this channel that I've chosen at time t based on the past observation as Wt. Z plus I is this vector which has all the other coordinates except the ith coordinate as z's values, except that the ith coordinate is set to +1. Z minus I sets the ith coordinate to -1. And the distribution of output of W, given that the parameter is Z plus I, okay, is this one. This is my distribution. And similarly, I defined PWT Z minus I. So you should keep this diagram in mind, that how is this distribution being generated. First, you sample xt from this Z plus I. So if you pardon me, I'll use a purple color here. Right. Okay, right. So first you sample xt from this guy, and then you pass it through a channel. The channel depends on everything you've seen till now, and then you get your next observation yt. This channel is that information constraint that you are applying. And similarly, this distribution here is pz minus I is the distribution of x, and then you pass it through w to get the induced distribution of the output y. So now we will go back to KL divergence again. It's the same thing. So now the mutual information between the information that yt reveals about ith coordinate of z is just this average distance from, so this radius that so the distance between this distribution, there are just two distributions. The distribution that is induced on yt when z has ith coordinate +1, and the distribution that's induced on yt when the z has coordinate -1. These are the two distributions. And mutual information is the divergence between this and the average of the two, this and the average of the two. This is because zi is uniform. That's why you have this half-half here and half-half here. So what did we do by conditioning over the z minus I? This helped a lot actually. With this, the distribution of xt doesn't depend on yt -1 anymore. The only way yt -1 comes into this is through wt. The distribution of xt now gets determined by just this parameter. That's why we condition on the remaining guys. Okay, this is a simplification we did by what is that step? By doing this step here. And in principle, this step can be weak. This step here. In principle, this step can be weak, but for all our applications, we have found this to be tight until recently. So, right. So it's unclear. It's not completely clear if this will always be tight, but currently this has always been tight. This is the only weakening we have done in the whole bound. Everything else is tight actually. And we did this because we wanted this structure, that the distribution of xt, the th sample now doesn't depend on what you've seen in the past, because you have now conditioned on this the unknown z. All right. So this mutual information, the average of these quantities is just the expected value over z, expected value over your past observation of this guy. And so now we'll have to handle this divergence. And let's bring in another simple observation about such divergences. So the kind of divergence we are looking at is just again for two distributions, P and Q. And there you see some sample from that distribution, and then you pass it through some channel W. The divergence between the output distribution under P and this average, we are trying to derive a bound for that. That can be bounded by KL divergence is less than or equal to chi-square divergence. So that's just some different notion of divergence. This inequality is nothing but log x is less than or equal to x minus 1. That gives you this inequality. Ln x is less than or equal to x minus 1. So you get this, and you can write this expression for chi-square distance. Chi-square distance between two distributions P and Q, in this case whatever these two are, is P minus Q square by P. And here we are assuming that everything has a density with respect to mu, so we can write these guys are just density. So we are writing in this form. You can write it in more general form, and you can, if you like, if you are a big fan of Radon-Nikodym derivatives, you can use them and write it in those forms. This expression can be written in great generality. Okay, so because it's too early in the morning for that kind of maths, I haven't had that much coffee. So let's just do this density business. So the distance, so this minus this is just this squared. And then in the denominator, I got this guy here. Okay, d mu, which is less than equal to, now both these terms are non-negative, these are the densities. So I dropped one of them. That will only decrease the thing. So I'll only increase it. I get to this form. And what I'm left with is this quantity, PWY minus QWY. Turns out that what is PWY? Let's try to work out this PWY quickly. It's the output distribution of the channel given the input distribution is P. So it's expected value over X generated from P, density of X. Expected value is already there. Expected value of X generated from P, W of Y given X, right? That's this distribution here. And similarly for Q. And here we assume P and Q both have density with respect to each other. So they are absolutely continuous with respect to each other. So we can express this expectation over Q as expectation over P by multiplying with Q by P. And when we do that, it looks like this kind of expression. So here there's a small typo. Should do minus of this. Okay. So this is the expression that you get. So what we see is that this is expectation with respect to P of this channel's density, what describes our channel, except this factor comes in. This is the normalized, this is how much, this is the ratio of their densities minus 1. Okay. This is what we are calling P here. So for any two distribution, this ratio of their densities minus 1 will come in. So when we substitute this, we get a nice expression. This chi-square distance is nothing but this half comes from whatever this half here. Chi-square distance is nothing but expected value under P, our first chi here, channel phi whole squared by expected value under P of the channel density. And this phi here is Qx by Px minus 1. Some kind of multiplicative change in densities when you go from P to Q.
So just one small comment that might be worth making for people who attended the first part of that Jaidev presented. So if you squint really hard at this expression, like the last expression on this slide, and you go back to Jaidev's slides, which were for a specific case with some specific kind of perturbation, which was like the Paninsky construction for discrete distribution, you can actually check that like these things end up being the same. So this is a generalization of the earlier bound. If you take like phi to be the right thing, and then you expand for the specific case.
Right. So this bound is for any PQ. So in fact, it will hold even if you have Q here instead of P, with phi replaced with Px by Qx and the expectation with respect to Q. Okay. The assumption here again is that both P and Q have density with respect to each other. Okay. So remember that we had something like this where expectation was over Z, and there was another thing here, and there are lots of Z's which come in here. Okay. By the way, from this step to this step, it's a little bit of a calculation I've skipped, but I guess because you see that there was some averaging and there was expectation over Z minus I, but now I've written expectation over Z. That's because this half brings in the distribution for the ith coordinate. But let's not worry about that. So we were here, and we wanted to handle this quantity. I brought in this general bound for this quantity. When we substitute, what do we get? So remember, this is what we have derived. So when we substitute this is what we have derived here. When we substitute this in our original expression, what we get is this quantity is less than equal to this, where now we have to define this phi zi, because the distributions of interest for us are Pz and this quantity, which is the ith coordinate of z flipped. Okay, so that's what my easy I is. It's a definition. It's the multiplicative change in the density when you switch from z to I. When you switch from z to z plus I, when you flip the ith coordinate, how much are these densities? And the assumption is all these densities, all these probability densities are absolutely continuous about with respect to each other, and with this 1 plus phi being the density. Okay, so that's our expression so far. Important thing is this is an expression which only involves the distributions of x, not the channel. So we have separated out the channel part. Okay. Okay, very good. So I have to accelerate. I'll wrap up in 5 minutes. Right. So with this expression here, now we take a max over w, we take a max over z. There was an expected value over z. We take a max over w to get rid of this t. Note that we can do it because that's the only place where yt minus was entering. That's what this conditioning over z minus I helped us with. And now we have this bound here. Just from this one, we have this one here. This summation over t goes away because after you take max over w, since we are assuming all the families are the same for every t, this just becomes n here. So it grows linearly with n. Information grows linearly with n, and you have this expression here. Okay, great. So this is our main result that we wanted to derive. The lower bound for this loss is gamma square k. This gamma is from our construction 1 minus square root of n and this quantity. And this quantity is, it looks ugly, but over the time, if you keep on staring at it, it will become very beautiful. Okay. So it's a simple expression which involves the underlying family that you have constructed, the underlying difficult case, and your channel family W. It's the notion of how informative your channel family W is for this particular example. Paninsky's example in Jeffries. Okay. So this is the quantity we have to handle in this bound. Everything else is just a number here. But what about this quantity? Well, it turns out that this quantity can further be simplified if you put additional conditions. What kind of additional conditions? Let's first assume that these phi, the densities are bounded by some alpha square. And let's assume they're orthogonal, which holds in the example Jayadev had and in many other constructions. Under these two assumptions, we can show that this quantity is bounded very simply by variance of this channel density under x by this. And this is just using Bessel's inequality. So I don't have time for this, but it's a very simple series of steps here. Because they are orthogonal, we can express the energy in any function A along them, and that's less than equal to the L2 norm of that function. Because they're orthogonal. That's all this inequality is saying. And this L2 norm of this function, well, function minus its expected value, we can do that because all of them are zero mean. This phi's are zero mean. So we can subtract any constant from it. We subtract the expected value and we get this. Because subtracting the expected value will make this the smallest and the tightest. So this is the tightest bound you can get from Bessel's inequality. So this is just the variance bound. Also, if you put additional conditions instead of just orthogonality, because these are zero mean, instead of just orthogonality, suppose you put independence and further say they are sub-Gaussian. Okay. So they have their tails die very quickly. Then it turns out that you can derive a very different bound using Gibbs variational formula. This is a little bit, it's elementary, but all the proofs are, you can write it in 10-15 minutes, but it's I think a bit non-trivial. And so you get a different kind of bound for this quantity. And turns out the bound that you get is just the mutual information between output and input of the channel W when the input distribution is PZ. Okay. So in summary, this expression, which looks like this under additional assumptions, can have very tractable forms. First of them, which comes from Bessel's inequality, is this variance of this by this. And second is just the mutual information between Z and Z. So we started with mutual information between Z and W, the output of W, and now we only have mutual information between X, like input of WX, and output of W. So this is only something about W, nothing about Z anymore. Z is just learning the input distribution. This is how informative W is. Okay. Okay, so we have seen heuristics 1, 2, 3, and we still have this dependence on W. How exactly do we control this dependence on W? Well, for information constraints, we can show that this mutual information, for communication constraint, we can show that this mutual information for a channel with L bit outputs is no more than L. And this quantity actually is no more than 2 to the power L. So if your construction has a sub-Gauss-Serenity assumption, you can get L bound, otherwise you'll get this 2 to the power L bound. For privacy constraints, you can show that this variance bound evaluates to e to the power rho minus 1 square. All right, that's all I want to say. Sorry for a bit of a rush at the end, but I was slow in the beginning, so that's fine. Okay, so references. Basically, whatever I said here is based on this recent paper that we have, which is Unified Lower Bound for Interactive High Dimensional Estimation under Information Constraints. But the reason I chose to focus on this paper is because it builds on a lot of existing work, firstly. So it's not like it's not built on that. And it gives a very unified view of all different techniques. So for instance, the other approaches that people have used in this literature are strong data processing inequality-based approach, which works only for the high dimensional setting, may not work for a discrete distribution setting. But in fact, it can be recovered from what we saw. What we saw at the end with mutual information showing up on the right side was a strong data processing inequality. And then there's this Fisher information-based approach, a more classic statistics approach, where you derive Fisher information-based lower bound, the Kramer-Rao lower bound of the Ventries inequality. And it turns out that actually this expression that we had in our general bound, this one here, is closely related to trace of the Fisher information matrix of the output of W when the input parameter is theta. Okay, it turns out this requires some calculation, and this requires at least you knowing the definition of Fisher information. So since I'm not covering that, I'll just leave you with this pointer. So in some sense, what we have presented relates to a lot of existing techniques. And in this way, if you just want to learn one thing about this topic, I think this technique, what we presented, may not be a bad idea to begin with, because it subsumes some of the other techniques. Okay, it's a very exciting topic. There are lots of work, and there's no way I can do justice to this literature review. I will not even try. The reason it's exciting is because I think these problems of information constrained inference will be quite important going forward as we develop this federated learning system. Not because it's just a buzzword; it is indeed a buzzword, but there are multiple reasons why these buzzwords become buzzwords. If one has to imagine what will happen next in terms of systems which are machine learning heavy, you can see that there's a lot of interaction between different components going on, and we are developing this system, cloud-based system, which are getting information from all over the place. So doing inference under information constraints will become important. And what is amazing about what we presented is that theory of this topic doesn't require so much maths. You can do things ground up, as we saw in this tutorial, and just requires you to understand this basic notions of distances and information, and you can derive lower bound. Upper bound, of course, may or may not, based on what you may or may not depend on the heuristics which you get from there. Upper bound is something we have not discussed so much in this tutorial, besides the simulator infer technique which Jaidev presented. Yeah, but with this, I will conclude my tutorial, my part of the tutorial, and now Clemo will have his recitation.